Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to this Frame Quilting Friday video. This week, we're going to take the Bargello quilt we quilted last week and turn it into this beautiful infinity scarf. And you can see I made two out of one quilt. So this is going to be some in the frame quilting, and then I'm going to do a little bit of finishing on my home sewing machine and a little bit of finishing by hand in order to make the scarf. So let's get started making this beautiful in the frame project together. So the first step is to lay out the back fabric, and I am using Minky fabric here, and that's going to be the back of my scarf. I love that because it's super, super soft and plushy. It's just absolutely perfect. So I have the pretty patchwork on the right side and then this super soft scarf on the wrong side. And I'm just going to generally spread this out and get it nice and flat to the frame. And I know I have a piece that is bigger than I need here, but that's going to be okay. I can trim that off later. So I just want to spread and smooth this out, just like so. And then now I'm going to use the channel locks on my machine to stitch across. And the channel locks are just a locking device here on the machine, on the frame, and that locks it so it goes in a direction. This way, if I lock down the ones at the very back of the machine, that would lock it going forward and back. So it just depends on which lock you need to use. And what I want to do is I want to check here on the quilt for where my kind of ugly stitching is. And you can see it starts right there where I attached the quilt to the frame. So that's where I want to get started. So I'm going to needle down, needle back up just to bring my thread up to the surface right there. I'm going to drop my needle back down again in that spot. And that's just making sure that I'm getting started so that when I do this line of stitching, this ugly stitching is concealed, meaning it's going to go onto the inside of the scarf. It's not going to end up on the outside and visible. So now I'm going to stitch over because my Minky is a bit big. So I want to stitch over and then now slide that into position. I'm going to clip off these thread tails just so that they're out of my way. So there we go. I'm just going to slide that back in place and just want to line up that Minky so it's nice and straight across. And then I've got the channel locks locked down. So all I have to do is just gently steer the machine while smoothing out the Minky here. And that's all I got to do. This is going to be really, really simple quilting today. All I'm going to be doing is stitching straight lines right across. And then, of course, I'm going to have a little bit of time and process in the finishing, but most of this is going to be done on the frame. So as you can see, my Minky wasn't cut all that straight, so I've got a little bit more here coming up on the back side of the foot, but that's okay. And I am stitching with my frame set to 16 stitches per inch. That's roughly about what I would be stitching at on my home sewing machine when I set my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters. It looks like about the same length of stitch to me. So I think that that's good because technically what we're doing here is piecing. We are piecing the backing fabric, the background, to the back of the scarf, and that is going to seal off those edges and finish it up nicely. So here we go. I'm almost to the edge. I'm just kind of pulling back on that just to check where I am. And I'm right to the edge. There we go. And now I don't want to stitch a straight line across. I want to turn this scarf into an infinity scarf, which means I need to leave this end open. And this extra Minky here is getting in my way because I need to be able to see where this other end is. So yeah, I think I just have way too much Minky here off the end. It's not helping me be able to sew this. So I'm just going to trim this off, roughly straight. There is going to be some off the long arm finishing. Oop, I don't want to cut my thread. I'm going to have to do a little bit of sewing on my home sewing machine to finish this off, and that's okay. All right, so I did a little back stitch here just to make sure that that was reinforced, and now I'm going to break thread and release my channel locks. There we go, and I can just clip these thread tails short. I don't need to tie them off or bury them. There we go. Okay, so now I just need to take a look at this line of stitching right here. So I had a quilt and it was really, really wide. I decided to turn it into 2 scarves. So I have a line of stitching here that indicates where those scarves would be split. This was also the width of my long arm, basically. So that is helping guide where I need to begin quilting, because again, I got a situation of some ugly stitches here. I want to make sure that that doesn't end up in my scarf. So here's what I'm going to do. As you can see here, I stitched into the batting area. I did that intentionally because I figured I would need some sort of guide to help me out and make sure that I was going to be on the right track. So I'm going to begin quilting. I'm going to pull up my thread right here. I know I'm going to cut that piece just a little bit short, but I think that's okay. I don't think that's the end of the world. I think we're going to have more than enough scarf. There we go. Just pull on that. Make sure I have nice long thread tails. Drop my needle back in the down position, maybe take a few stitches in place. There we go. And I'm going to, again, stitch into the batting area, right across. I'm going to lock down my channel locks because, again, I just need to do straight line quilting here. I don't need to do anything wild or crazy. Although, I gotta say, this kind of method, you probably could do curves. You could do a curvy edge, and I think that would work out. I'll have to test that next. So many fun ideas to try. Okay, so now it's just a simple process. Quilting right across. I lock down my channel locks again, and I'm just gonna stitch right across the frame, right through the middle. Now, if you're ever worried that maybe you might be getting some ugly stitches in there, you know, just some of that ugly area, well, just pull back up on your fabric and take a look at it and see what that's looking like. And I can see here clearly that this is looking a-okay. I've got only pretty stitching that's going to go into the scarf itself. All right, so I smoothed all of this back out again. And I'm just going to smooth and spread as I go. Just hit my start button and let the machine stitch and just smooth this out as I go, pulling the machine down slowly and gently. So there's so many different ideas for using the channel locks on the machine like this to stitch out projects automatically. So one thing I'm thinking of is bags and pillows. Basically think of anything that you can stitch with straight lines and that you've seen, you know, as an in the hoop project. And that same project could probably be done on your long arm. Of course, the automatic stitching and stuff that you get on your embroidery machine, unless you have automation on your long arm, that's not going to be a possibility. But you can absolutely do the straight line quilting with the aid of channel locks, and that would make it much faster to get your quilting done and get the project done at the same time. All right, there we go. That's the first scarf stitched. Now I'm going to break thread once more, then advance the quilt through the machine. I have 2 more lines to stitch, then we'll take it off and move to our whole machine to do the finishing. So I've already cut the 2 scarves apart, and I'm just trimming up this seam allowance. So it's about 1/4 inch from that stitching. And I've just lined this up on my ruler. Here, just line up 1/4 inch mark on a long ruler and cut right across. And I'm not being too careful or persnickety about this because this is going to go on the inside of the scarf. So the biggest thing is just don't cut your stitching. So here we go. There we go. It's very exciting to be finishing this up and have 2 fun projects done. There we go. Okay, get rid of that. And then now we turn the scarf right side out. So just reach right through and grab the inside here and then just start pulling it through. And I really think this is a nice width. This came out to be around 11 to 12 inches wide, and I think that's really nice. You know, it's not so narrow. I mean, of course, a narrow, skinny scarf is nice too, but I like a big, thick, chunky scarf so it's nice and warm. There we go. Okay, now check your stitches and make sure that these edges look good. And yes, this is looking great. Now, I'll be honest, I had a little bit of issue on my other one. And here, let me show you what happened. So I turned this one right side out and I could see some ugly stitches here right on the edge. where basically the edge of the quilt was coming in line, and I had stitched the minky too far down. So the solution with this one, to fix this, all I need to do is turn it wrong side out again, and then maybe use a walking foot to stitch to the inside. So here I'm going to turn this right side out, sorry, wrong side out, and I'll show you what I mean. So basically, once I turn this wrong side out, sorry, there's so much fluff from this minky. Basically, yeah, I think I'll flip it over even, and I can actually see that kind of slightly ugly stitching here. What I'll do is I'll take my walking foot and line that up so that I'm stitching a good 1/2 inch inside of that. So I'm sure I'm catching all of that ugly stitching and making sure that is not included in the scarf itself. So that was just a little mistake that I made with that one, but this one is looking really, really good. Now I need to clean this up. I'm gonna grab my lint roller and do a little bit cleaning to get all these purple fluff, cleaned up everywhere. And then we're gonna start working on these ends, getting those connected together. So I went on ahead and did that stitching in order to fix the scarf so that way I didn't have that ugly stitching showing up. And it was just that simple, just stitch with my walking foot straight down the side. And this was just a lesson learned. Next time I make a scarf like this in my frame, I'm going to stitch and give myself a good 1/2 inch. So that way I'm sure if there's something ugly or not looking quite right on the edge of the quilt, then I'm way inside of that and I'm not cutting it too close. Okay, so here we go. We've got the end, and I realized something. We're gonna make this an infinity scarf, which means it's a complete loop. And I noticed that color-wise, if we cut off that entire square, that entire strip right there, and you see how that lines up, then the colors will be continuous too. And it's one of those things, it's not always fun to cut off an entire color, entire band of your quilt, but in this situation, I think it's warranted, and I think that this will make it better. So I'm going to trim this off, and this is just, part of the Bargello pattern, and keeping that colorway consistent so it continues that pattern all the way down. And all I did was just line up my ruler, square that off. I'm going to do the same thing down here. And this time I don't need to cut off a whole square, I just need to trim up the end. So I just kind of flatten this out generally. There we go. Place the ruler on. Again, I want to make sure that I get rid of any ugly stitching there on the edge. So I'm going to line up the 2-inch mark along that seam line. I'm also lining up some of the thin lines on my ruler with the seam lines in the Bargello. So that way I know that this cut is going to be straight and square to the scarf. There we go. Okay. So now putting this together, super, super simple. I'm just gonna line this up and grab some pens. So I brought the patchwork side of the fabric together, and I'm lining up those seam lines, making sure that they match nicely. And I'm just gonna pin at each seam line. And I will pin something like this because it's quilted, it's thicker, most likely the fabrics would shift and do something weird if I didn't have those seam lines pinned nicely. And I'm going to go all the way down to where the minky begins, and you can see you're going to have to kind of shift it around. It's going to go a little weird, but that's okay. We're starting from the patchwork and working our way outward. All right, and this looks like it's probably not going to match up perfectly. Not the end of the world. Don't freak out, if the seam lines don't match or the edges don't match. It's just a scarf. It doesn't have to be a absolutely perfect creation. It's utilitarian, and that's the whole point. All right, so now I'm going to go this way, matching up more seam lines, and I'm just simply pulling back on that, finding that seam line is supposed to match up with that one, layering those right on top of one another, and then pinning through all of those layers, all 6 layers. Minky, quilt fabric, batting, and then another layer of quilt fabric, minky, and batting too. Okay, so as we reach the other side, you want to give it a tug this way, and you can start to see it's going to go a little bit weird, almost like you're trying to tie it in a knot or something. Don't worry about it. It'll all come together just fine. There we go. And then with these edges, you could just kind of have one seam line going, seam allowance going in one direction and one seam allowance going in the other direction. That will probably work out great because it's so bulky. So here I'm just going to overlap that. And you want to make sure when you stitch this to reinforce that, to stitch over that back stitch, because that's going to be a point of weakness. Okay, and then now I'm going to kind of scrunch this up because I want just a little bit of this minky penned. We're going to try and stitch as much of it as we can on the machine, but having a pen here right at the beginning is going to be helpful. So there we go. I know this looks a little crazy, but this is going to work out great. What we're going to do, take it to the machine, and we're going to begin at that upper pen and probably a wider seam allowance. I'm probably going to stitch this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to get started here, back stitch, then stitch through all of this. And then as I go, I'm going to try and stitch more of this minky together, and that will only leave a gap about that wide that I'll have to hand finish, only a little bit of hand finishing, but then my scarf will be complete. Okay, let's get on the machine and stitch this together. So I'm here on my machine and I've got it set to a straight center stitch and a stitch length of 2 millimeters because I have minky here and I want a nice tight stitch, but it doesn't have to be super, super, super tight. And just in case you're interested in the Eversewn Sparrow 20, you can come and check it out at leahday.com/sew20. I really have enjoyed using this machine for the last year, and I think it has a terrific set of features. I have certainly been very satisfied using it for projects like this. So here we go. I've slipped that underneath the foot and I'm just flattening that out. And I didn't take it all the way to that pen in the purple minky. I'm kind of setting the foot kind of somewhere in the middle there. Okay, so now I'm going to take a few stitches forward, take a few stitches back to secure it. There we go. And then flatten things out. I just want to make sure I've got minky here on the bottom. I want to make sure that doesn't slip up underneath the needle and get stitched in the wrong place. That would be the only bad thing. So here we go. We're going to work on about an inch or two at a time, making sure that that seam allowance stays nice and flat. I have one going in one direction and one going in the other direction. I'm going to take out that needle, that pen right there, flatten this out. Sometimes it helps to just get one hand underneath the whole project. That can help. We're going to back stitch at that seam between the quilt and the minky 2, because that's another area that can be just a little bit tricky. And now things should speed up a bit. I'm going to take out my pins as I go. And I'm just lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the foot. I measured it. It's somewhere between 3/8 and 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. And with this, it doesn't have to be a perfect quilting seam allowance. It doesn't really matter. The length of the scarf is entirely up to the length of the quilt that you began with. Here we go. And a few more pens, a few more seam lines to match up. And I hope you can see I'm just stopping with each pen, double checking how everything is feeling, making sure that I'm not stitching the minky to the wrong side, which I would have to rip those stitches out. I don't want to do that. There we go. Getting right here. And I'm just shifting. What I'm doing is pulling on that minky around that area to bring that together too. And that will work. There we go. And I have noticed that the seam line there between the quilt and the minky wants to open up a little bit because, of course, where I backstitched using a long arm, that ended up getting trimmed off a bit. So that's a lesson too. This is my very first time trying an in-the-frame project. So this has been really interesting just to learn the ins and outs and kind of the upsides and downsides. And I'm sure my next project will be even easier and even faster to do. So here we go. I'm going to backstitch that twice because I know that seam was just getting a little bit loosey-goosey. All right, so now my goal is just to stitch as much of this minky together as I can, because that's going to reduce how much I have to hand finish. So here we go. And this is going to get harder and harder because basically I've seamed up that whole inside edge, and I can't turn this like inside out or anything like this. You know, this is basically as much as I can bring together. I'm going to stitch that and then back stitch to reinforce it, and then the rest will just simply be a little bit of hand stitching to finish. Go. I think I can do just a few more stitches. Yeah, right there. There we go, and back stitch to finish, and then let's check it out. So I'm just going to give this a little tug. You can see that fabric pops to the inside, and just that little bit of fabric needs to be hand sewn together. And all I have to do is just pull on that just a bit, and you can see how nicely that tucks down. And I'll just place a few pins along there, do a little whip stitch, and that will be sealed up. And then let's take a look at the other side. You can see just a little bit of, you know, that's a deeper seam, but I think if you press on that, maybe even kind of wiggle your way inside of that and finger press that seam allowance open and flatten it out real good, then I think that it will be even less noticeable. So here you can see I'm just digging my fingers in there, flattening out that seam line. And if you have a really small iron, you could go in there and give it a good press. There we go. Let's look at it from the other side again. Not too bad. And look at how beautiful those fabrics, that pattern continues and has this beautiful infinity style scarf. So you can wear this, have some patchwork on one side, have some super soft minky on the other side. I think that was an absolutely perfect project to make on the Longarm. So that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and learning how to do some in the frame stitching to create this super cool project. I love that I was able to make 2 scarves really quick and simple. I did learn a lot in this process, and I would say my biggest tip is when you're doing the stitching of your backing fabric, whether it's minky or anything else, go inside a little bit further than you think you might need to, and that way you're sure to catch any ugly stitching that might have been used in order to secure the quilt to the frame. And that way you won't have to run into that issue that I did and have to do some stitching with your walking foot. So I learned a lot in this process, and I have so many more ideas for projects that we can create together right in our Longarm frame. So be looking forward to many more tutorials and fun quilting projects coming up soon. Now you can find all of the videos that I've shared so far on my Grace Kunique 14+/15R. It has 2 different numbers, but it's the same machine. And you can find all of the videos I've shared at leahday.com/frame. I'm also a dealer for Grace Company, and I absolutely love my machine and frame. So you can come and check out that system at leahday.com/grace. Now make sure to use the coupon code Hello My Quilting Friends to get $100 off your frame purchase when you order from leahday.com. So come and check that out at leahday.com/grace. And until next time, let's go quilt!
When kids try and put a scarf on.